Who cares? I mean, it's a detail. Who cares?
Few moments later.
Yes, welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your perpetual host, David Krayden, broadcasting to you live from the nation's capital, where we had a monsoon last night. I was out talking to a freedom group in, I would say, a little east of Orleans, actually. And it was a heck of a drive getting there. But more about that. And John Carpay from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms will join us momentarily after we do a brief summary of some of the current events we're dealing with.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
Okay. We'll do it live. Okay. Well, no. We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
And we're doing it live, folks, as we always do. Once in a while we record, but generally live. I think it keeps the energy up. Something we can all use. Before we get to John, I want to just go over a couple things here, because I promised last night when I addressed the Liberty Group that I would include this in the broadcast today. This is a great little, shall we say, a time sheet, if you will, for how this government under Justin Trudeau and now under Mark Carney wants to survey and censor you. And all of these bills, Trudeau managed to get two of them passed. Bill C-11, Bill C-18, Bill C-2, that's a surveillance bill that has gone through first reading. Bill C-6, controlling the internet and telecom, that could impact my station and a lot of other people out there. Bill C-9, speech and ideology. This is the crazy bill about hate symbols. And the last time I had John on the show, we discussed this. And what's coming up? Bill C-63, replacement. It used to be called the Online Harms Act. I'm predicting it's going to be called the Online Safety Act, because everything the government does for you now is for your own safety. It's incredible. And I have a little anecdote about that I want to talk to John about in a minute. But what's going on with the cabinet? We could have up to 6, probably 5, because Stephen Guilbeault has said this morning he's not leaving cabinet, even though he doesn't like pipelines. But this is a mass exodus. Melanie is perhaps going to Paris as the ambassador. I think that's a great job for her. I really do. I have no hard feelings with Melanie. I think Mark was hanging her out to dry as industry minister, because she was going to be wearing this Saab Gripen fighter jet contract that I don't believe Canada is going to even sign. That's incredible. So my good friend Mark Petron on Juno News talking about the major cabinet purge is coming. Yeah, and there's Melanie Joly eyes Paris ambassador role. Well, yeah, she'll add a bit of beauty and glamour to it, I suppose, but certainly was out of her element as a cabinet minister. Now I'll get to this first reading later, but this is quite interesting, and this is where we're at in this country right now. Constant give and take, to and fro. And with that, I want to welcome John Carpay, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Thank you for coming back on this show. You're
glad
always
to be with you, David.
Guest. And as I mentioned at the beginning there, I was addressing a group in Eastern Ottawa last night. It was very bizarre because I'd never actually been there. We met at the East Indian restaurant, Indo-Canadian restaurant, if you will. Yeah. And it was a bit like the Twilight Zone, because, we were following the GPS to get off here. And it was like it was the monsoons were still going. The fog was everywhere. And I said, I don't think there's anything down this road. Suddenly this restaurant appears, little town appears. Felt like the Twilight Zone. It really, really did. But while I was addressing the group last night, we talked about the censorship bills that you've talked about so much. And it still amazes me, John, that I don't think the official opposition gets it. I really don't, because they had a chance to take this government down 3 weeks ago. I don't mean the last time where they were up and down deciding on whether to be present or not, because they did not want to bring the government down. There was an opportunity. I don't think they really get how dangerous these censorship bills are. And if these things go through with the support of the new Democratic Party MPs, and I believe all 7 will support this legislation, they love censorship, this country's cooked. It really is. I think we're in a hell of a mess. And I don't know why there's not a greater sense of urgency amongst conservative MPs in the House of Commons right now. It really does bother me.
Well, the NDP did come out against Bill C-2, which was introduced in June. That was the Strong Borders Act, which I've called it the Strong Surveillance Act. And that's a bill that would give Canada Post the right to access letter mail without a warrant, creates a brand new Authorized Access to Information Act, which would empower thousands of federal government officials, not just police, to search our smartphones and our computers, prohibiting the use of cash in amounts of 10,000 or more. So you can't use cash to donate to charities or make purchases. All of this bad stuff in Bill C-2. And there was such an outcry from across the political spectrum. You know, you had the Canadian Civil Liberties Association was against it, as well as the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, but so many other groups. And so the government actually backed down on Bill C-2. They took out the sections pertaining to borders, immigration, refugees. They took that out of Bill C-2, put it into a separate Bill C-12, which has a chance of getting passed. It might get conservative support. And the really bad stuff of Bill C-2 has been put on the back burner. And so why did this happen? Because Canadians contacted their MPs. So right now the priority is people need to contact their MPs about Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, which would, if passed, take us further down the road to becoming like the United Kingdom, where every day over 30 citizens are arrested over their speech.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to a woman last weekend at the farmers rally here in Ottawa. Of course, this took place at 26 cities across Canada in support of farmers, agriculture, and it was really inspired by what happened at the Universal Ostrich Farms. And this woman came up to me and she said, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me." And she said, "I got a phone call from the OPP, a liaison officer, saying, Are you organizing this farmers' protest on Parliament Hill?" And totally shocked. How would he even know I was even going? And she said, "No, I'm not organizing it. I just happened to be going." And he says, "Well, we're very worried about your safety." Why? Safety from whom? The cops or who? And then she got this weird meme and she blocked everything. And she basically came to me and said, "It's already happening. We've got people monitoring our social media and threatening us if we do something the government doesn't want us to do." So you've seen the video of that poor woman in the UK at 2:30 in the morning. The cops at her door, basically threatening her to take down her social media, or else we might charge you. But she ends up by saying, "Okay, you haven't charged me? Take a hike. You want to charge me? Then we'll talk." But it's happening in Canada, and I find it just very, very worrisome. And I'm hearing reports from people that it's already happening in anticipation, I think, of the government thinking they're going to get away with these bills. So very dangerous.
Well, like I said, people need to contact their MP because, it's okay to complain about bad laws, and it's good to get the word out to people. But then at the end of the day, you've got to take it to the next level, and you've got to contact your MP and say, vote against Bill C-9. It's an attack on free expression. If there's enough pushback against it, as there was with Bill C-2, the government will put it on the back burner.
Well, you're right. We have to take direct political action, and just being angry, being being upset. Protesting is not enough. MPs have to do their jobs. So, but I want to talk to you about this exciting new report. And on November 17th, this came out, Manufacturing Consent, Government Behavioural Engineering of Canadians, authored by my old friend Nigel Hannaford. And Nigel and I go back, this is incredible. We go back to when I was a public affairs officer at Comox, British Columbia, 19 Wing Comox. And Nigel was the headmaster of a school. I think it was Duncan, just south of Comox. And I used to go to his school every year on Remembrance Day and do the address. And that's how Nigel and I met. And of course, we worked together at the Western Standard and over the years. So Nigel's a great guy. So happy to see him contributing in this way. I read this report over the last couple of days. I found it absolutely fascinating, but to some degree frightening. And I think this basically in the abstract, because you use this word throughout, the Impact and Innovation Unit. This report examines how the Government of Canada has incorporated behavioral science and legislative mechanisms to shape public attitudes, restrict expression, and manage dissent. Through the Impact and Innovation Unit, IIU, in the Privy Council Office, PCO, federal officials have implemented strategies drawn from the so-called nudge theory to influence citizen behavior under the guise of evidence-based policy. These methods expanded dramatically during the era of COVID lockdowns and vaccine passports, shifting from communication improvement to deliberate psychological conditioning aimed at securing compliance. The Justice Center urges thorough scrutiny of such behavioral programs to preserve transparent representative governance in Canada. I can't say anything amen to that. But these are psy-ops, aren't they? These are psychological operations. And the Privy Council Office, which most Canadians don't have a clue what they do. They've heard of this PCO, but they know that former cabinet ministers are automatically members of it. But how often does the PCO actually formally meet? Do they have regular meetings? We know there's a clerk of the Privy Council. That's ostensibly the guy who organizes things. But we know virtually nothing about what the PCO does in terms of affecting government policy, except that they do. And I don't think the United States, for instance, has anything parallel to this, where it's like a star chamber that decides what the government should do. Unelected, they might have been elected at some point in their lives, but they're unelected now. But they wield tremendous power. And based on what I'm reading in your report, the PCO is essentially a branch of the Prime Minister's office now, doing policy and playing psychological games with Canadians. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes. The Privy Council Office is the bureaucracy, the civil service counterpart to the Prime Minister. So, for example, if you've got your federal transportation minister, there would be federal bureaucrats or civil servants that are kind of the permanent employees that are working in that department, running that department. Ministers come and go. Sometimes they stay on for a few years, but so for the Prime Minister of Canada, the counterpart is the PCO, the Privy Council Office. And so this Impact and Innovation Unit is part of the bureaucracy that is accountable to the Prime Minister, but not directly accountable to Parliament. And our tax dollars were spent to persuade the Canadians to roll up their sleeves and get injected with a substance for which there's no long-term safety data. This was not an exercise in the government providing helpful or relevant information to facilitate fully informed consent, but the government used our tax dollars to do surveys on which messages were most effective in getting people to let go of their anxieties about all of the reports of the vaccine harms, children dying of heart failure, which never happened prior to 2020, top performing athletes that died in their sleep and are found dead by their parents, people of all ages dying after getting injected. And so our tax dollars were used by the Impact and Innovation Unit to test different messages to see, well, what is the best way to get Canadians to relax in the face of all these vaccine deaths and vaccine injuries reports and roll up their sleeves so we can move full speed ahead with promoting the injections. So that was our tax dollars used for that.
And they're clearly playing mind games with us. We love that terminology now, gaslighting. I don't think that term came into vogue, I guess, about 5 years ago. It referenced a great 1944 film with Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer, which is a favorite of mine. But the government is clearly playing mind games with us. And I found this interesting because the messaging strategies appeared structured less to support informed decision-making than to shape public perception around the vaccine and drive compliance. For example, the government fixed its core message: the vaccine is safe and effective, so get vaccinated, well before conclusive clinical or real-world data were available, or their effectiveness and, above all, their safety. Now, up until recently, if I said the vaccine was neither safe nor effective on YouTube, I would be demonetized at the very least and perhaps get a strike against me, because that was absolutely taboo. Couldn't say that because, the vaccine was safe and effective. And we all know it was safe and effective. Of course, the evidence that it was not safe or effective, that it was in fact totally ineffective, did not prevent you from getting COVID, and potentially was toxic to your system. Now we're finally able to say that, thanks to the voluminous research of people like Dr. Naomi Wolf, who produced the Pfizer papers based on the research of thousands of scientists and participants, who have basically come out and said Pfizer and the other big pharma companies knew this vaccine was not only basically useless in terms of combating COVID-19, but it was toxic and potentially lethal, and they knew it. And they went ahead anyway, and the government played along with this game, saying, don't worry, it's safe and effective. And I can tell you, as a former military person, as somebody who worked in Parliament Hill for members of Parliament, I always sort of trusted the government to some degree. Of course, I don't like liberal governments very much, but I believed that no matter liberal or conservative, the government was basically on my side. Because after all, when I was in uniform, it sent me overseas and brought me back safely. It looked after my health care. It looked after my family. So it really probably didn't want to hurt me. COVID changed all that for me. I realized the government could be my mortal enemy. And as I've lost a sister and a father-in-law and others, I've lost literally 6 people I served with in the Canadian Armed Forces are dead today of turbo cancer, heart attacks, heart disease, and other things that they should never have gotten at my age. And I am I'm in my early 50s. They should not have died that young. And these were all basically contemporaries of mine who were dropping off at very young ages, relatively speaking. And you have called, the Justice Center of Constitutional Freedoms has said, somebody has to be held accountable for this in the government, for getting away with this, for telling people this is a safe and effective vaccine when they knew it wasn't. Do you think anyone is ever going to be held accountable, at least in Canada? I can't speak for the US, but in Canada, will government or bureaucrats be held accountable for putting this vaccine off as a safe and effective one, and when it wasn't?
Yes, but only if there's enough understanding in public opinion that these vaccines were ineffective. As you mentioned, they didn't stop you from getting COVID. It didn't stop you from dying of COVID. They certainly didn't stop transmission, which would have been the only possible rational justification for having mandatory vaccination policies. If the vaccine actually did stop the spread of COVID, you could potentially argue that it should be mandatory, but there is no evidence that it stopped the spread. And before they made it mandatory, there's no evidence that it to show that this vaccine might stop the spread of COVID. After it was made mandatory by Christmas, right? It was made mandatory in September, October, depending which province. By Christmas 2021, COVID was rampant. It was spreading everywhere, in every country in the world, no exceptions, including highly vaccinated countries like Gibraltar, Israel, Canada. The reason why we need the public opinion on side is because you're not going to get criminal charges being laid or other types of prosecutions if the majority of Canadians still believe that lockdowns were based on science, that they were medically necessary, that they were beneficial. If people believe that the vaccine was safe and effective, then those beliefs will trickle up into the police forces and the Crown prosecutors and the judiciary. You're not really going to get anywhere. However, the good news is, as we continue along the road of educating the public about the truth, we very well may end up at a place where there's enough Canadians have an understanding of the truth, and then you're in a position to hold to account the people that perpetrated this harm and this damage.
Well, clearly, reading through this report, it's not just that the government is issuing blatant propaganda. And this is the sort of propaganda I think it's nuanced to the degree that it doesn't look like horrible sort of Soviet-style propaganda where everybody laughs at that sort of thing. You go, oh, you can't take this seriously. And I think they've gotten so good at passing off propaganda as the news and enlisting the mainstream media in the process to sell these stories. Because if you go back during COVID, there was no pushback from any mainstream media organ in this country. Literally, no media outlet in the mainstream media, the ones that are subsidized by the government.
Yeah, there was no journalism. Journalists are supposed to walk what I would describe as the healthy middle ground between paranoia and naive credulity. So paranoia is where you say, everybody's lying to me all the time. Everybody's out to get me. Everybody's evil. The government's out, everybody's out to harm us. You can't trust anybody. Everybody's lying. That would be paranoia. On the opposite extreme is this naive credulity where it says, well, the politician said it, I believe it, that settles it. Because politicians never lie. They never accidentally give out false information. If it's coming out of a politician's mouth, it must be the truth, and you have to accept it. Okay, those are the two extremes, the paranoia and naive credulity. A journalist, as well as you and I and everybody else, we should, there's a healthy medium where you're not paranoid and thinking everybody's lying to you all the time, but you're also not in this naive, well, everybody's telling me the truth all the time. And so a journalist, when a politician makes an assertion, the journalist should take it with a grain of salt and said, okay, well, the cabinet minister said X. Okay, great. So, but is X true? Not from a paranoid sense, oh, I'm sure she's lying. I'm sure that X is false. No, but you question it. You get a second opinion. You look into it. Is that actually true? And that's what the government-funded media did none of. When the government said COVID is, when they were peddling the fear of, based on the Neil Ferguson prediction, Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London said that COVID would kill tens of millions of people. It would be as bad as the Spanish flu of 1918. And, that was peddled in Alberta. You had Jason Kenney compared COVID to the Spanish flu of 1918. And so you had all this fear mongering. And as you said, David, the media just propagated the same stuff. Whatever the government said, the media put it out there as if it was the truth.
Yeah, as did so many politicians. And I think one of the greatest disappointments for me was Jason Kenney, who I knew from his days on Parliament Hill. I knew Jason when he was just an MP. I knew Jason when he was a defense minister. And I always had a lot of time for Jason Kenney. I don't anymore. And because he completely caved on COVID, became a lockdown king in the same way that Doug Ford did and other premiers who just thought this was fantastic. Wow, we can start telling people what to do. 24/7.
How to live. You can tightly control their lives, tell them when they can open their businesses, when they can't, when they're allowed to earn a living, or when they have to just kind of suffer devastating financial losses. It's like you've got this on-off switch to control people. And I mean, Jason Vyatt broke the COVID rules himself by dining at the Sky Palace, and he also locked up pastors in jail for breaking COVID rules. And that was a decision of his government. He loves to say that he has no control over the sentences imposed by judges. That's technically true, but it was his government that came to the Alberta Health Services went to court to secure injunctions against certain churches and businesses, so that if you broke the COVID rules, you would not, like in Ontario, just get a ticket and another ticket and another ticket and another ticket, but you would actually be in contempt of court if you broke a COVID rule. That was the Kenney government upping the ante and creating this situation where pastors were locked up in jail. It wasn't because the judge's discretion. It's because the Kenney government went to court, and instead of having the COVID regulations be enforced with regular fines, they upped the ante by securing these injunctions, so that if you broke a COVID rule, you were deemed to be in contempt of court and you would be immediately arrested and jailed. And that's what happened in Alberta, thanks to Jason Kenney.
Yeah, massive disappointment. And before I get to the next page, I want to highlight of this report. You piqued my interest, or you piqued my memory here, because it's the same with the Doug Ford government here in Ontario, which of course masquerades as a conservative government, although it is technically a progressive conservative government, which is, as Tom Darby, my political science professor at Carleton, used to like to say, that's the bloody oxymoron. And of course it is. But Doug Ford and people, he's managed to escape this. Doug Ford is the one who prosecuted Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. There was a provincial court they sat in that I sat with them in. And I talked to Chris yesterday. He was supposed to be up again for this is incredible, what they're calling the forfeiture of his truck, named Big Red. And of course, it became an icon of the Freedom Convoy rally protest, the trucker protest. And he's literally has to defend his right to own his truck. And it's Doug Ford pushing this, because Doug Ford could have told the Attorney General of Ontario, okay, just lay off. And it happens all the time. They tell judges to lay off on much more serious crimes, getting people off for 2 years for rape, 4 years for murder. But Chris Barber and Tamara Leach were always political prisoners. But do you believe that the Ontario government is persisting in trying to steal, expropriate, however you want to call it, Chris Barber's truck? And here we are at late November, and they're still in court debating this.
Well, first of all, I don't know. My guess would be no, insofar as the way that things are supposed to work, and I hope they're working this way in Ontario and Alberta and everywhere else, is that you have the separation of the prosecution services from the politics of the government, right? So let's say in Alberta, if Danielle Smith's nephew gets pulled over and is charged criminally with impaired driving, a free and democratic society where the rule of law prevails, you're not going to have the premier phoning up the chief of police saying, hey, my nephew's just a good old boy, give him a chance. Don't prosecute him for impaired driving. Like we don't want that kind of corruption in the country. This was the whole SNC Lavalin, where the prosecutor made a decision to prosecute, and then Trudeau, the prime minister, doesn't like it and starts pulling strings and interfering with the prosecution. It's not supposed to do that. So back to Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, the way that I would hope that Doug Ford is not talking to the prosecution service, telling them what to do or what not to do, because there should be like a wall between the premier and the prosecution service. So the prosecution services are acting independently of politics. Having said all of that, I do think that the prosecution exemplifies a double standard, where if Chris Barber was a dark-skinned Aboriginal Muslim lesbian who had devoted her life to trying to control the Earth's climate, I don't think Chris Barber, that person would be getting treated the same way. But Chris Barber, white male, against lockdowns, against vaccine passports, that's a double standard. That we have prosecutions in Canada based on your political beliefs, which is not how it should be. It should be your behavior only. That is the only criterion that the police and prosecutors look at. What kind of behavior are you engaging in? If it's illegal behavior, we'll prosecute. If it's not illegal behavior, we won't prosecute. And no regard whatsoever, are you protesting, is it about taxes or abortion or immigration or Israel, Hamas, Aboriginal rights, lockdowns, vaccine passports? The issue that you're protesting for or against should have no bearing on prosecutions. And this is the problem with the Leach and Barber prosecution. It is political. I'm not suggesting it's Doug Ford who's pulling strings, but it is a political prosecution because the prosecutors don't like their cause. They don't like that they were protesting against vaccine passports and lockdowns.
Yeah, I wasn't speaking of Doug Ford picking up the phone and telling the Crown Counsel or even the Attorney General what to do. That is political interference. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a Crown attorney that is off the rails in this province. It is totally gone rogue. And the Attorney General of Ontario could say, okay, that's enough. There's no justification for taking the man's truck. That is in the power of the Attorney General to make that judgment and to say, that's it. No, we don't see any reason to go any further. Crown, stop now. Now, that is clearly not happening because they're enjoying this. And it is absolutely, to me, it's like they want to humiliate this man to the nth degree. And of course, they want him to go to jail. They weren't satisfied with house arrest, and they come back saying, well, it's got to be harsher sentencing. So to me, that's clearly political in the other realm. And I do think there should have been some constraint and reasonable action taken here, and not to allow these Crown attorneys to just ride roughshod over this man's life. But anyway, I want to get back to your report because I think this is absolutely important for Canadians to realize. So you're saying the IU mandate is therefore to enhance knowledge of innovative policy approaches, which I read that as lie. and support the government in addressing complex policy and program challenges through behavioral insights, data analytics, and social innovation. In other words, the Canadian government, quote, enhances, unquote, Canadians' knowledge of the kinds of things the government wants them to be, quote, informed about, unquote, about such as the safety, quote unquote, of vaccines and the danger, quote unquote, of not taking them, such that Canadians are more likely to support the government's policies. Is this any different than the sort of propaganda you saw under Joseph Goebbels in the Third Reich, or what the Soviet Union peddled? This is all about telling people what they should think, how they should feel, and if they don't, they're not really part of the community anymore.
Well, the National Socialists in Germany, propaganda minister Goebbels in particular, were quite familiar with the fact that has also been known by other governments before, probably even before that time and afterwards. When people hear a message dozens of times or hundreds of times or thousands of times, they come to believe that it's true. And so the National Socialists in Germany used this very effectively. They controlled the media, even to a greater extent. And in Canada, we've got government-funded media that a lot of people are listening to, but there's an awful lot of people not listening to the CBC and Global and CTV, so on and so forth. So people do come to believe come to accept as true, what they hear over and over again. So we had these messages in 2020, we're all in this together, or my mask protects you, protects me, we're all protecting each other with these masks, you get that. Masks are keeping us safe. And unfortunately, there's people that they hear that a few dozen times and say, well, it must be true, because maybe deep down they don't believe that a false message could be repeated so often in so many places at so many times by so many people. But unfortunately, governments do. I think they always have from time to time, and they always will promote false messages. And it's very sad that our own tax dollars are being used to manipulate our thinking that way.
Yes, extremely. I think this is the last section I wanted to highlight. How exactly was the WHO, the World Health Organization's behavioral insights tool, deployed in Canada? The IU was tasked to find ways to reduce public anxiety about reports of adverse events following immunization. They focused its effort on reducing public anxiety about reported adverse events to the vaccine, rather than taking such reports seriously, despite having no long-term safety data of the vaccines in the first place. This, to me, is indictment in the 10th degree. So they told people, relax, don't worry, there's no problem here, without any evidence to say so, and growing evidence to the contrary. So I go back to the need for someone to be held accountable for putting out this propaganda, because this wasn't just feel-good propaganda. I can tell you don't feel very good when a relative drops dead because they had 4 or 5 jabs. You don't feel good about that. And you tend to be a little angry at a government that lied. And this is what I'm seeing here. Go ahead, lie about it, because the end justifies the means. And this is all about manipulation of people's minds, opinions, attitudes, and behaviors. This is government manipulation at the highest degree. And thank God you put this report out and are highlighting this. This should be read far and wide by media, especially, who were part of the problem, as you identified and as I identified. They were part of the problem during COVID. They have been part of the problem during other incidents, especially those surrounding avian flu, which the mainstream media is convinced is going to be the next pandemic. But clearly somebody should be held accountable for this, because this is not just about stretching the truth. This is about inventing facts and blatant propaganda.
I couldn't agree more. We have to work towards that point where when the majority of Canadians understand that lockdowns were not based on science, they were not medically necessary, when enough Canadians understand that the vaccine was neither safe nor effective, you have to get to that point where the culture has changed enough that this has come into the minds of the police, the Crown Prosecutor, the judges, the lawyers. So we will get there. We just have to keep on educating. We have to keep on speaking the truth and educating our fellow citizens. And Canada will come to a place. It's up to us whether it's going to be 2 years or 20 years, but we will come to a place where there's opportunities to prosecute the guilty.
So I guess final question, John, are you relatively optimistic we can stop these censorship bills if MPs are informed, or at least feel the pressure from their constituents, if they feel that this would not be wise to vote in favor of these bills? Do you think we can stop these censorship bills that are coming?
Well, I think we can. It's people have to actually do the hard work, and it's not that hard, but look at who is your MP, find out. That's not that hard to do. The House of Commons has websites. There's other ways. Find out who your MP is if you don't know already. Contact him or her and send a short email saying, please vote against Bill C9, and type in your name and your address so they know that you're, the MP knows that you are one of her constituents or one of his constituents. And we have to try. I mean, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So the worst thing we can do in this situation is do nothing and not contact our MPs to urge them to vote against Bill C9.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm not, perhaps not quite as optimistic, but I'm going to be fighting as hard as I can in any capacity I can possibly find. And that includes keeping the MPs informed. But I think what you're doing at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is a huge part of that battle, of that mission. And you serve that purpose extremely well on a day-to-day basis. That's why I support your organization the way I always have. And I support the work you're doing, John, on behalf of Canadians who are fighting and in many cases being persecuted by a ravenous government, federal government especially, but sometimes provincial as well, that disregards their rights, disregards foundational freedoms in this country, and consists of a desire to enforce, I think, an increasing authoritarian regime in this country. And if we don't push back, I guess it's our own fault if this comes to pass. And I think that was the lesson of J.D. Vance's recent post on X. And some Canadians objected to that. A lot of Canadians said, right on. Stop blaming Donald Trump and the United States for Canada's problems. You elected these bums. You elected these people to make these bad decisions that you're living with today. And it's in our power to stop electing people like that and to start electing people who actually work for us. So I appreciate your time today, John. It's always a pleasure to have you on this show, and you're always welcome. And God bless and Godspeed. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me on your show. Have a great rest of the day, David.
Thank you, John. That was John Carpay, of course, from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Always a friend of the show and a friend of freedom. And the information for that group, if you want to donate financially, will be in the description. I've been supporting that group for years. It does some great work. Now, just want to show you our latest stickers. PsyOps. Love these. These are sort of dedicated to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms because their report on PsyOps is, I think, incredibly important, should be read. It's Big Brother is watching. I think that's going to be the most wanted, sought-after sticker we've ever produced. I need new conspiracy theories. All my old ones came true. Conspiracy theorist? Nope. Conspiracy knower. Yeah, we've got that one on a t-shirt and a mug as well. And this is an update on a Justin Trudeau sticker with Mark Carney. Yeah, they're taking your free speech away. They did that. Let's have a look at the other merchandise in the store. We'll be right back. Yes, and remember, we do have those ostrich stickers and the ostrich hoodies. Proceeds are going to Katie, to Sydney, and the Universal Ostrich Farms. And I've got a video out this morning, a fundraising video. I think I'll show that to you tomorrow, but I'm quite proud of it. Thank you so much for watching today. Keep fighting, resolve to resist, and let's kick the bums out. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sharing this station with your friends and family. Thank you for hitting that like button, because I tell you, we are fighting back in a way I've never had to before, because I'm going to keep this station on the air I am going to keep fighting for freedom. I'm going to keep fighting for justice and truth. And I am damn determined to resist this Carney government in any way possible as it encroaches upon our individual freedom. And it will continue to do that, mark my words. I'll be back again tomorrow. Same time, same place. 10 a.m. This has been David Krayden, broadcasting live from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.